Depth of field is a camera feature where objects are blurred based on their distance from the camera. This is so commonly seen in TV shows and movies that our eyes have just become adapted to it. And we use depth of field to control where the viewers are looking. Let's say we have this subway scene here. Everything pretty much looks the same as far as blur is concerned. But what if, for example, we blurred the background, the subway? Then that would put more attention on our subject. Or perhaps maybe this person is just an extra in the movie and he has nothing to do with the plot whatsoever. Maybe there's some kind of clue to a murder or something like that written on the subway wall, in which case we might want to blur the guy and keep the subway sharp. Thankfully, Adobe has actually made this quite easy for you to play with depth of field here in After Effects. I have this camera here. I'm going to double click it to open its settings. As we'll see momentarily, we could just as easily do this in the timeline panel, but I think it's a little bit easier to do it this way. So I'm just going to go ahead and enable depth of field and click OK. Then I can open up my camera settings, open up camera options, and here we have depth of field. So this is where we could have gone to turn it on as well. The focus distance is perhaps the most important component of creating depth of field. The focus distance is the distance from the camera that pixels will remain sharp. Now, as we start playing around with this, we'll have a hard time seeing what is getting blurry and what doesn't get blurry. And it doesn't help that as we scrub, we don't get a live update really of the blur being added. So here's a great trick. If we take the active camera view to one of the side views, let's say the right view, and let me zoom out just a little bit, and here we have this camera. And as we adjust focus distance, we can see this vertical line right here adjusting. Well, this vertical line is the focus distance. This is where objects will be sharp. So this right here, again, we're looking at a side representation of our 3D scene. This vertical plane right here is the character. And then here is the subway in the back, and then also the scenery in the background. And so again, this is the side view. And so if we wanted the character to be in focus, then we would adjust the focus distance to be right where the character is. Now let's change the view from right back to active camera and zoom in a little bit closer here. If we take the depth of field off and then on again, we're still not seeing much of a difference. So what we're going to do is increase the blur level to a ridiculous amount just for the purposes of this example so that as you're looking at this movie, you can tell what's going on here. And we also might want to increase the aperture, which increases the blur. Now I realize that sounds a little bit quirky if you have a camera background. With video cameras and also with still cameras, the aperture typically is mainly used to control the amount of light coming in. So typically if you open up the aperture, you're letting more light in and it changes the exposure. In this case, it's not like that. Apertures on cameras also have a kind of secondary feature where they control the depth of field. Here in After Effects, that's the only thing aperture affects is the depth of field. But now with aperture and blur level really high, even watching this tutorial online, you still should be able to see how it's blurred our background, and that instantly draws our eyes to the character and not the subway background. If we take depth of field off, you can see a big difference in clarity between the before and the after. Of course, we could even make this more crazy and ridiculous if you wanted to, but at that point it starts to look kind of fake. So I'm just going to leave this set to about 300-ish and leave my aperture to about 90 pixels or so. Now, this kind of works like the human eye a little bit as well. I mean, if we had our focus on this guy, then I don't know if the background would necessarily be blurry, but it wouldn't be really in sharp focus. It'd be in our peripheral vision. Well, same thing. If we focused on the subway, then the character would be in our peripheral vision and not be super clear. So we could emulate that here as well. Let's go back to the right camera view, increase the focus distance to go farther out. And so, again, this vertical line right here represents the subway. So if we keep the focus distance here, then when we go back, we will see the subway in focus and the guy out of focus. And that's exactly what's happening here. So again, blurry guy and super sharp subway. And keep in mind that focus distance is an animatable parameter. So you can animate two different things being in focus. Maybe just showing a regular scene and then there's somebody hidden off to the distance, and then you change the focus distance, you animate it. So then all of a sudden, the viewers can see that there's something hidden off in the shadows in the distance or what have you. And that's how you create depth of field in After Effects.